Attorneys, what is the silliest case in which your client ended up in prison because believed in a law that didn't exist? Story 1. My favorite Sovsit story was a guy in front of a judge saying he wasn't the person on trial, he was representing that person with the same name bullshit. I don't understand it because it's crap, so I can't exactly reproduce it. The judge asked him if the person he was talking to was a licensed lawyer, because unless he was licensed, he couldn't represent anyone other than himself. The guy had to decide if he was the same person as the accused, and see his Sovsit arguments disappear, or stick to his guns and be arrested for practicing law without a license. Story 2. I've only ever prosecuted one sovereign citizen, who of course represented himself in court. I Googled various portions of the brief he submitted in advance of his argument to find that about 95% of it had been copied and pasted from various sovereign citizen blogs, all of which were citing outright fake legal history and made-up cases to support their position. His argument, by the way, was that he could not be convicted of driving without a license, because the United States government does not have the authority to require that sovereign citizens have driver's licenses in order to operate a vehicle on public roads. He did not win. Story 3. Once saw a case where a sovereign citizen was fighting a foreclosure, amongst other things, for non-payment. Some of her fellow sovereign citizens accompanied her in the courtroom and ripped their shirts off to reveal bright green shirts that read, "Screw this court." They were genuinely surprised when the judge had them removed. Story 4. My husband has a current case with a sovereign defendant whose entire defense is that, because the U.S. flag has horizontal stripes, the U.S. is actually under maritime law, insert Arrested Development joke here, and maritime law doesn't address the $100,000 Social Security scam this guy ran against the elderly. Story 5. This will probably get buried, but I wanted to share nevertheless. We recently had a case where Dad tried to get out of paying child support by arguing that he did not sign a contract agreeing to pay. His main argument, however, was that the child was property, and he did not hold an interest in the property, aka his child. So, the child was the property of the state, and not his responsibility. I almost lost it when the judge asked him, in regards to who was responsible for taking care of the child, whether it was him or the state that got mom pregnant. Story 6. I had a sovereign citizen walk into my office a few years ago and try to get me to argue his case in state court after the state seized land he owned for failure to pay taxes. I had a vague idea of what sovereign citizens believed before he came in, so at least I wasn't totally caught off guard. I didn't even try to explain the law, though. I just told him I couldn't help him, then gave him the phone number of a lawyer I hate in town, and sent the guy on his way. Story 7. I'll try because I read up on the sovereign citizen movement trying to understand how a man named Carl thought he could get away with using federal land for free. The first thing you need to understand is that even the phrase sovereign citizen is a self-refuting oxymoron. To be sovereign is be self-governed, and to be a citizen is to be governed by a state. Truly, these are some top minds we're dealing with. The general idea behind most pseudo-legal theories is that the government derives its authority from the consent of the governed. That is, you pay taxes because you agreed to pay taxes. While that sounds like noble principle, it's not the case. Every government derives its authority from its ability to enforce its laws. That is, you pay taxes. Because if you don't, the Internal Revenue Service will arrest you. So in order for government to be able to govern everyone, they create a fake legal person through your birth certificate and then trick you into thinking you are that person. All of the weird rituals and magic legal spells sovereign citizens create are designed to separate your personal identity from your legal fiction, thereby freeing yourself from all debts and legal obligations. Basically, they think they're playing some sort of genius legal gambit where they trap the government in a web of its own rules and beat them at their own game. However, I cannot stress enough that this is simply not how the law, anywhere, works. The government doesn't need to do this complicated sleight-of-hand trick, be able to govern you. Simply living within its recognized borders is enough. This is why every single sovereign citizen case that has gone to court has failed. Story 8. I'm a paralegal for Child Protective Services. We had a dad who was a sovereign citizen and sent us a bunch of handwritten wackadoodle paperwork. He said he was sovereign so he didn't have to obey our laws. We stole his property, his kids, and sent a Freedom of Information Act request for financial records. Threw our county's legal department for a loop because he sent us his ambassadorship card, stating he had diplomatic immunity from a fake Native American tribe. I had to do all of the paperwork to show we didn't have to do anything under the Indian Child Welfare Act for this case. Still a ton of work to prove they didn't have Indian ancestry. Story 9. A public defender described refusing to represent a sovereign citizen client who believed he did not need a driver's license because he no longer recognized the state's authority over roads and motor vehicles. The client insisted on filing quote 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 the defender could not ethically support due to their oath to uphold state laws. The defender informed the judge, leading to the client needing to represent themselves. Story 10. A free citizen on trial for tax evasion claimed black people did not have to pay taxes because they used to be slaves. A baseless assertion reflecting sovereign citizen ideology. This likely contributed to his conviction, as such arguments are not legally recognized. Story 11. Pretty much all sovereign citizens' arguments. American law doesn't run on the open sesame principle where a few magic words will open legal back doors, but the best was a client electing to go pro se and claimed immunity via a Native American treaty. Although the treaty had expired in the 1870s, he wasn't a Native American. He said he was adopted in jail by someone of that tribe, and the treaty's terms didn't grant him immunity anyway. His argument failed, and he's looking at 150 years just in enhancements for 12 armed robberies and a bunch of assaults with no good defense on the facts. Story 12. Oh my God! I had a client in Fed custody in New Jersey who got some of that brainworm renounce my citizenship bullshit in his head, and I spent a solid 2 hours of my life explaining that he was not a Moor and subject to international treaty, and that the entirety of the United States was not actually a fiction, and that committing a Hobbs Act burglary in New Jersey meant that you were going to go to prison. He was sure that if he told the judge at sentencing that he could trace his family line back to some invasion 1,000 years ago, that the judge would be forced to set him free. The guy thought this and said it was his plan. He still believes that I am in on it, that my oath to uphold the law of the land means that I routinely sell out poor black men that resort to forcibly robbing teenagers at gunpoint. Have I said too much? The lizard people are coming. Story 13. Guy in traffic court. In the case of speeding, how do you plea? I refuse to plea. What do you mean? Texas Driver's Code of Conduct is not a legislative law of the land. It's a contractual agreement that does not apply to me, for I am not a driver as defined by the state of Texas as a person who operates a motor vehicle in a commercial capacity. I am a traveler, operating my private conveyance on public road, and I do not need your permission to do so, nor am I subject to you, Commercial Code of Conduct. Judge. Ordinarily you'd be correct, however. You have a driver's license, and in that voluntary contract, you agreed to abide by our codes and policies and be subject to our jurisdiction, and since you offer no evidence in your defense and instead want to argue legal semantics, I find you guilt in the amount of $255. Thank you, Your Honor. May I discharge my debt to the state with yet another obligation? I beg your pardon, can I pay you with an IOU, or script drawn upon a private bank? No. Thank you, Your Honor. Then what am I to pay you with? Cash. You get it at the bank. I'm very sorry, Your Honor, but I've been to the bank, and they don't have dollar bills. All they have are Federal Reserve notes, which legally are instruments of debt, and carry with it an equity attachment. Since I can't discharge my debt to the state with yet another paper obligation, what am I to pay you with? Gold and silver? You can pay me with either. Thank you, Your Honor. Can you please explain to the court how 1 is equal to 38? I beg your pardon? Well, you see, Your Honor, It takes 38 as these green dollars to buy one of these silver dollars. And you said that I can discharge my debt to the state with 255 of either. So can you please explain for the court record, and my benefit, how you consider the two are equal? The judge stands up and bangs the gavel and yells, "You go sit down with the prosecutor, and whatever he comes up with, I'm gonna sign." Story 14. I am a law student, and I spent the summer interning with a small-town prosecutor. There were some gems. One woman's defense for kicking an old man on the bus was that it was self-defense because he invaded her spiritual vagina by sitting on the bus. There was another repeat offender that I will call Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones is a mean old man that lives up in the hills and refuses to pay taxes, among other illegal acts, because he claims that his land is a sovereign nation called Jonesville. Every time he gets arrested for letting his horses run free, a crime in my state, building a fence across a public road, threatening passers-by with a gun. Story 15. One of the best jobs I ever did as a newbie attorney was for a sovsit, and it sucked. He was in town from Utah or Idaho or wherever they grow these people, visiting family. The police report said that he was riding his bike through a neighborhood where there had been several burglaries. No, he matched the description even. It wasn't even the middle of the night. The cops decided that they wanted to talk to the guy, who responded with, "I don't consent to any stop," which he had every right to do, as they had zero reason to stop him at all. Riding your bike through a rough neighborhood is not a crime. Needless to say, they got pissed off at that and decided to chase him down and charge him with obstructing. I'm not sure what exactly he was obstructing other than their pride, but the poor bastard spent 10 days in jail because he couldn't get in touch with anyone to pay his bond. I got the case assigned to me at his arraignment. I got to his pretrial hearing, saw the discovery for the first time, and took it to the prosecutor. This charge is bullshit. He didn't have to stop in the first place. File your motion, then. I dragged the guy out for a bond reconsideration. He seemed fairly normal at the time. Judge gave him a recognizance bond. I figured he'd end up going back to wherever in the middle of nowhere he came from, but nope, the guy showed up to his next court date, 30 days later. I had filed my motion and was expecting to have a hearing, but the prosecutor dismissed it that day. Super bad move when he could have just done that at pretrial, but whatever. So we go on the record for the dismissal. And it began. No amount of, "Your case is being dismissed, you can go now," could stop him from his rant about the fringe on the flag, the Uniform Commercial Code, Admiralty law, and whatever other nonsense they always vomit out. I kept whispering in his ear, "It doesn't matter if the court has jurisdiction or not. Your case is being dismissed. Just leave." The judge kept telling him the same thing. Nope, he had to air all the grievances. The bailiff was literally making throat-slashing gestures at me, and all I could do is give my best. I tried, "Not sure what else you think I can do here," shrug. Other bailiffs came and looked into the courtroom, because I had other cases that were being held up, realized what was going on, rolled their eyes, and left. At this point, I was being held hostage by some rambling fool who could have left 20 minutes ago. Finally, the judge, who was the sweetest and most patient person on the bench at the time, lost her temper for what might have been the first and last time in her career. "Your case is dismissed. Now get out of my courtroom before I hold you in contempt." He finally listened to that and left. Too long. Didn't read. Representing sovereign citizens sucks, even on the rare occasions when they're actually in the right. Story 16. I did one. I had to drop him as a client because he refused to acknowledge that he understood the prosecutor's resolution position. He does not stand under any court, so could not understand the position. He also couldn't comprehend, appreciated, get, or acknowledge the position. Breakdown in communication. Motion to be removed as counsel. I still check the reported decisions once in a while to see if I can find his trial. He had a good case for a lot of it, so I'm curious about how it worked out for him. Edit to add. To answer your question, I couldn't defend him. I tried, but it is not possible to do so if you can't receive instructions. Story 17. There was a case on YouTube where a sovsit claimed to be there to represent the person and refused to register an appearance as the person. The judge's reaction was to point out that since they were not a lawyer, and only lawyers or the defendant can register an appearance for the defendant, and then to move the case to the end of the docket with the note that they would file a warrant for no-show if there was not valid appearance registered. The sovsit tried to change their tune immediately, but got muted and had to wait to the end of the docket. Story 18. It was almost as gold as when a judge decided to, quote, prove that they had jurisdiction by holding the sovsit in contempt and having the bailiff remove them, saying they will check to see if the sovsit recognizes their jurisdiction the next day. Story 19. So basically, these people may very well get a tax refund, but since they got it by filing fraudulent taxes, they are likely to eventually be caught. When they are caught, they will need to repay the refund with interest and penalties, and if the Internal Revenue Service decides it was willfully fraudulent, they may be looking at jail time. Story 20. I have a sovereign citizen who removed his mailbox from his house, among other lunacy. We've been taking different properties from him for over a decade, but he persists in being obnoxious and failing to keep his houses. He appeals the shit out of everything, so it always ends up being a years-long struggle, and we've been taking his properties in a piecemeal fashion. Story 21. I work with taxes for my state government, and some of the things I've heard from sovereign citizens is just completely insane. I once had to cite a statute to a guy who was arguing that he shouldn't have to pay taxes because there's nothing in the state's constitution or statutes that say that taxing a person is legal. I cited a statute that states something like, quote, an individual, entity, estate, or trust will be taxed by the state, blah blah blah. The guy argued that he's none of those because he's a person. I tried to explain to him what the word individual meant, but he was not having it. Needless to say, he owes a ton of back taxes. Haha. Story 22. Godspeed. I work in tax law, and the amount of people trying to claim their homes as churches is absurd. I've actually stumbled upon social message boards that tell you how to keep your house tax-free by registering as a church. These people have no idea about the law, and it's hilarious when it catches up to them. Story 23. I ran across them a bit in family law, and our local judges would get tired quick. On one occasion, I happened to be in court on the same docket before a judge who's known to be very patient with process, and would give them extra time to argue and let them testify, etc. The woman refused to cross the bar to counsel tables, and was yelling at the judge from the gallery about how she was here as capital letter so-and-so who was not the person known as so-and-so. She kept yelling over the judge, and asking whether Her Honor was acting in her, quote, administrative capacity or her judicial capacity, and where was her seal of the court, blah blah blah. Eventually the judge was like, everything I do from this bench is in my judicial capacity, and found her in contempt, because she wouldn't stop yelling and calling her ex-husband a, quote, constitutional violator. Had to Google that one. Our homegrown lawyer didn't take very kindly to the contempt. Story 24. Years ago I took on a case for a friend. It was a family estate squabble, and my client's brother owed him money. The sovsit brother got his greedy hands on his father's money outside of the estate process by getting himself made joint with his elderly father on some bank accounts. Pulling that stunt is a no-no in Canada, definitely frowned upon by the courts. But so far as Sovsit Man was concerned, it was finders keepers all the way, and his father's will be damned. I sent Sovsit Man a letter demanding that he pay, and he stuck to the Sovsit playbook. He paid my client with a check. The check was not your normal check, drawn on an actual bank account. Instead, It was some weird, strange thing that he got off the web. The bank the check was drawn on didn't exist, and the check had all kinds of strange wording in fine print on the back. "Can I cash this?" my client said when I showed him the check. "Go for it. But tell the bank in advance that you know it won't clear, so that they won't think you're pulling a scam." So my client cashes the check. And of course, it bounces with extreme prejudice. After the check bounced, we sued the brother for the money he stole from the estate. It was a short, simple lawsuit, just a few pages long. We served the brother at the house he owned, free and clear thanks to the money he stole from the estate. The guy had 30 days to defend, and on day 30, I got his defense, filled with the usual sauve-sit nonsense. The defense also had a huge mistake in it, one of the biggest I've ever seen, and I've been doing this a long time. Sauve-sit man started harassing me and my staff. He sent emails. He sent letters. He left voicemail messages. He came by the office uninvited, demanding to see me and making threats. He kept it up until the cops said they'd arrest him if he came by again, but by then, it was time for his court date. So I'm in court, asking for judgment, and the sauve-sit genius is there, talking his legal babble, saying words he doesn't understand. The judge shut him down after about 10 seconds and gave my client judgment. Sauve-sit man has a meltdown and is escorted out of the courthouse. Of course he appeals, but I don't care, because of the mistake the guy had made right out of the gate. His mistake was serious and fatal. I don't know about other countries, but in Canada, if someone gives you a check and it fails to clear, you can sue for that. All you have to do is prove that a check written to you bounced, and that's all you need. The court will give you judgment. So when sauve-sit man sent my client the bogus check, he handed my client an airtight cause of action, an easy win of a lawsuit, and of course I pounced on it. When sauve-sit man's check bounced, my client sued him for that too, in a separate legal proceeding that we started on the same day as the estate case. The two claims looked almost identical, at least on the front page. My client's name was the same, the defendant's name was the same, and the court file number was identical, but for the final digit. When we served sauve-sit man with Claim 1, the estate claim, we also sued him on Claim 2, the bad check claim. I think he thought that the second claim was just a copy of the first, because he only defended the estate action. On the bad check case, he didn't defend, and I had default judgment after 30 days. So, a few months later, sauve-sit man wants to negotiate. He's feeling mag. Story 25. I tell them a story of a sauve-siv I had that refused to listen to any advice. He was vocal in the jail about all the stuff he knew. One day he disappeared. Everyone in jail thought he had beaten the charge, and through magical language was freed, and now has access to a large sum of money. In reality, he was picked up by another agency and sentenced to 20 years in prison. The local prosecutors dropped the charges, because why waste resources when he was already going down elsewhere? I tell that to my clients when they first enter the jail for the first time. Be careful who you listen to. Just because they disappear from the dorm doesn't mean they are free. Story 26. What the heck is a sovereign citizen? I suppose I can Google. But here's a little story. When I was a baby misdemeanor public defender, a client told me that he was unarrestable, as he was told by a lawyer named Mr. Smith, the head of some federal department at the time, that he, client, was famous for a Ninth Circuit case. The case was about how it was lawful for him to be injected with psychotropic meds without his consent. I stalked this guy, Mr. Smith, poor but kind man, who eventually called me back and said, "There is no such thing as being unarrestable. Good luck." That client went on to have a fixed delusion that he, quote, inappropriately touched me at the county jail, and we had a relationship that his subsequent lawyer interfered with. He went to prison for stalking me, which I wasn't proud of, but a now deceased psychiatrist said to me, "He's done it before, and he will do it again. He is of the rare 15% that are not safe in the community, and his obsession with you will only end when it is replaced by an obsession with someone else. So, yeah, agree, shut that down." There's no significance to whatever he is saying that impacts his legal problems. And with my admitted bias, it also suggests mental health issues. Story 27. Literally used that quote on my family friend who keeps spouting off her CIT nonsense. It almost sank in, but not quite. Probably closest I came. In my opinion, it's like a cult. Once they buy into this nonsense, it's almost impossible to convince them it's nonsense. I just don't understand how a reasonable person can devolve into this. It seems like a lot of people began buying into this crap after the pandemic, and they just believe whatever their echo chamber spouts off. I'd truly love to know how to combat this enough to get some sense into their heads. These people just willingly ruin their lives. It'll start with no insurance. Now they've got suspended license. Continue driving with fake plates, so gonna get pulled over. Now it's a criminal matter. Definitely not going to court, so there's warrants. And it just spirals worse and worse and worse, and then they look at jail time. To be honest, I wouldn't care as much as I do if she wasn't always trying to tell my 12-year-old family members that the law is fake and you don't need a license and blah blah blah. Leave the kids out of it. Story 28. Step 1. Get your driver's license revoked for reckless driving, drunk driving, etc. Step 2. Decide you don't want to live with the consequences of your actions. Step 3. Be extremely gullible. Believe literally anything you read online. Nigerian prince wants to give you his inheritance? Awesome. Bill Gates will give you $1 million if you forward this chain email? What a nice guy. Say some magic words and you don't have to follow traffic laws? That's convenient. Step 4. Now, armed with the belief that you're immune to laws, go about your business breaking laws. When confronted by law enforcement, just repeat mantras you read on the internet. Now they'll arrest you for breaking laws, and you will go to jail, and if the courts think your activities warrant punishment and you're not just a nuisance, you will get tried and convicted and sent to prison. But while you're sitting in your cell, you can tell your cellmate that the government can't actually do this to you because someone on Facebook said you're immune to laws. Story 29. I had jury duty for an assault case for a sovereign citizen. It was an interesting experience. The guy beat up his neighbor with a baseball bat because she wouldn't pay for his cable TV. He refused to participate in the trial at all. He refused to use the public defender, and we were repeatedly sent out of courtroom by the judge when he started off on some weird tangent. After the trial was over, the judge came to talk to us and explained everything. In a sense, it kind of worked for the defendant. We were somewhat worried about the fact he basically had no defense for him. But at the same time, it was all pretty cut and dry, with multiple witnesses who had known the guy for years, so it's not like it was someone picking out a stranger they saw in a high-stress moment. It also wasn't his first rodeo with assault, and the sovereign citizen thing was just his latest effort at avoiding jail. It didn't work. Story 30. I'm convinced that most sovereign citizen types are just trying to get out of paying for their crimes. This is almost 3 years old, but you may have heard about a guy that drove through a holiday parade in Wisconsin, killing 6 and injuring tons. When he went to trial, he rejected his lawyer and tried to defend himself using sovereign citizen. This dude was not your typical conspiracy theorist. They had him dead to rights, though, and there was nothing the yacht could really use to defend himself. So I think he latched on to sovereign citizen as a long-shot hope of getting out of it. Story 31. I've ran into a few of these while working in prison. I loved hearing, "You can't write me up. I'm a sovereign citizen. In fact, I demand you release me because the state can't legally hold me." They were pretty harmless on the inside. However, one of the videos we watched for firearm training was about a sovereign citizen stop that turned tragic, resulting in the loss of 2 officers. They may seem somewhat harmless, but they represent one of the greatest threats to law enforcement officers. Story 32. I watched the same proclaimed sovereign citizen in court a few times. He kept referring to himself as the ambassador of the trust or something. It was back and forth between him and the judge for a while at one hearing, just trying to get those simple procedures, since he could not give straight answers to anything. The judge ended up ordering a competency evaluation. He was a first-time drug offender, so he was eligible for a deferred finding, meaning the whole case would be dismissed if he complied with probation for a year. He actually wanted the felony conviction, just so he could argue his point on appeal, against his attorney's advice. He was professional about the whole thing, and actually reported regularly to probation for a year. Then, at his review hearing, he dismissed his public defender, took the felony conviction, filed lengthy affidavits, and gave a long speech in court. I don't get it. He could have easily avoided a felony conviction, and he even did the full year of probation, but he instead chose to make his sovereign citizen platform. Story 33. I'm a probation officer. We had one guy who somehow made it through getting arrested, going to jail, getting his trial, and being sentenced to probation without acting out all sovereignty. But come to our intake meeting and then start refusing forms saying he represents the entity of the dude. What the heck? If anyone was thinking about this defense, it never ever works. Ever. It has never worked. Don't waste your time. People who follow the sovereign citizen bit are just sucked into what is essentially a cult. They're usually people with mental health issues who get conned into paying for these alternate licenses. It's all a scam, and they actually represent a huge threat to the country. Edit. I guess to answer the question, we kicked the guy out of intake and rescheduled him for the next week. He never showed up, so we wrote a warrant on him. He doesn't live at the address he gave us, so he's been labeled as an absconder. Story 34. Former probation/parole officer. I supervised sexual offenders for a couple years, and the overall majority of them were Native Alaskans. I'm not saying all sex offenders supervised are Native AK, but by the numbers, my caseload was overwhelmingly that demographic. We had one guy that served the rest of his suspended time and was off probation/parole supervision, but still a registered sex offender. He failed to comply with almost every directive given by myself, other officers, and the courts. A few months after getting off supervision, he was arrested for failing to register as a sex offender. While incarcerated, he coached a few of the guys on supervision, but also incarcerated for some violation. When those other guys got out and returned to my caseload, we began to have problems. First, it starts off with them not signing in paperwork, or signing it under duress, which oftentimes is spelled unduress or some form of that. They'll cite the Uniform Commercial Code, and I think I looked it up once, and the chapters, etc., associated with what one guy was citing had nothing to do with being sovereign. It then becomes more of an issue because they will refuse to take polygraph examinations. They begin to refuse to answer questions and only want to talk about what jailhouse lawyering they are undertaking. With one guy, it was especially difficult because he participated in sex offender treatment while in jail and had a period of time on the outside where he was doing great. Once he was not subject to the white man's laws, direct quote, he regressed into his old thinking errors, and my best guess is that he sexually reoffended. That's a whole other story. So, fast forward a bit, I'm arresting him. He passively resisting arrest. Story 35. This sums it up well. The famous are not immune. For example, the American action movie actor Wesley Snipes adopted sovereign citizen techniques in an attempt to defeat his income tax obligations. United States versus Wesley Trent Snipes et al. No 506 crossing 00022 WTHGRJ1 USDCMD flat, February 1, 2000. Snipes presently is serving a 3-year prison sentence for income tax evasion. Story 36. In all seriousness, nothing a sovereign does should surprise you. Hell, it wouldn't surprise me if they try to file a fraudulent deed conveying your father's property as reparations, or something equally as crazy. Here in Florida, it's a crime to file a fraudulent lien, and some sovereigns have found themselves doing hard time as a result. I would look if New York has a similar criminal statute. Story 37. Kind of. One common strand of sovereign citizen thought is that there is some underlying notion of natural law, or common law, which is the true supreme law of the land, and under which, conveniently, whatever it is they're trying to do is legal. Under these theories, statutory law, the law passed by legislatures, is subordinate to natural law, and where they disagree, the Sovkhat's notion of natural law takes precedence. This is often mixed in with conspiracy theories about how statutory law is contractual in nature, and that it only has power if we make a contract with the government, leading to fears that government actors are trying to sneak a contract past them when they're not paying attention. It is very likely that, insofar as the accused has thought it through at all, they aren't arguing that serious harm is legal under their personal definition of natural law, but rather that the court's power is only to hear statutory law that they have not agreed to, so the statutory charges they face must be dismissed. I doubt he'd be willing to engage with anyone on the question of which court can hear natural law criminal cases, however, because it's clear his personal motive is to avoid punishment for the crime he committed. Sovereign citizen arguments are just a means to that end. Story 38. It is pseudo-legal jargon purposely designed to confuse people. Sovkhats who are in the know can feel superior when they rattle off a bunch of facts. It sounds legal, so regular people have difficulty refuting it, and people who know the law are hit with circular arguments that mostly just wears them down. It's hard to debate a topic when someone declares that the existing rules are incorrect, then proceeds to argue a set of made-up rules, and won't budge from that position. Doesn't work out well in a real courtroom when the judge can just say, "No, that's not a valid objection, moving on now." This video does not promote illegal activity. Stories are shared for commentary and education.